Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
You know that old term, making hay while the sun shines? That is literally and figuratively what is going on right now. And one of this summer's hottest trends is the cost of real estate and, quite frankly, even broader, development in general. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy, the real questions about not just what is driving the broad Carolina's exceptional growth, but how is it being financed? And with the continued low cost of money vis-a-vis low interest rates, is there any possible overdevelopment? We'll kick this week's discussion off in just a moment. And later on, one of the firms that has contributed to fueling growth and facilitating growth across multiple industries. We'll chat with Ashton Poole from Triangle Capital.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, David Bradley from the Statesville Chamber of Commerce, Joseph C. Von Nessen, Ph.D. of the University of South Carolina, and special guest E. Ashton Poole, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Triangle Capital Corporation.
Welcome to our program. Gentlemen, happy summer. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you, Chris.
You bet, David. Joey, let's start with you. This, I don't want to pull everybody down, and you don't need to get into it too deeply, but, it seems like the economy is still chugging along here halfway through the year. A lot of good economic development announcements coming out of South Carolina. It seems like modest increases in those indicators in the economy that make sense. How would you rate it?
I think that's fair. The economy is strong. I think if we look at the national perspective or what's happening in South Carolina, in both cases, most metrics are showing that the first half of 2017 has been good, and we're anticipating continued growth through the second half of the year. So if, regardless of whether we're looking at manufacturing, if we look at real estate doing well, consumer confidence is up, really at the highest level since 2010. Consumer spending activity is up. So most signs are showing that the growth that we've seen will certainly continue for the rest of this year.
Yeah, to reference the quote we used at the top of the show, David, making hay in the sunshine, it seems like North Carolina's done that, and there's been a string of economic development announcements that have not been small. Right. 2,000-person Infosys putting a stake in the ground up in the Triangle and so on and so forth. Is this late-stage growth, or is there a lot more momentum to come? And is this, I'm sorry, one more point of that, is this kind of HB2, post-HB2 catch-up?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's, I think for many of us, we're just beginning to realize the momentum. So I don't think it's late stage. I think for many, maybe in the metropolitan communities, it's beginning to fan out into the sort of semi-urban communities like Statesville. But we have expectations that this growth is going to stay with us for quite some time.
Yeah, Joey, same question. I mean, is this, and I know you kind of talked about that a little bit, but when you look at kind of the list of South Carolina wins for commerce in general, all these things, I'm trying to think of the Chinese tire manufacturer in Orangeburg County, we talked about it last week, but these big announcements, BMW $600 million additional amount, Boeing's doing more, Volvo's doing more. These are good problems to have. Do you worry at all about that heavy manufacturing part of the portfolio in South Carolina that also could swing the other way when the economy finally does slow down?
Well, it's certainly true that we don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket, but advanced manufacturing across aerospace, the automotive sector, tires, so there is some diversity within advanced manufacturing. But I would say the biggest concern we have right now is workforce needs.
Absolutely.
That is by far the number one factor that I think is going to limit our growth, certainly for the next 6 months to a year, probably longer, because demand is there. The demand is strong, but firms tell us over and over again that they have trouble meeting the workforce needs, and that's something that we have to keep at the forefront of policy wise in order to make progress.
David, I got to ask you that question, because we've heard that question, we've heard that same issue, that same concern for years now, and it doesn't seem to be holding the Carolinas back.
Well, it doesn't seem to be. It's not holding the Carolinas back, I don't think, at this point. But I think the opportunity for it to begin to be more of an anchor that keeps us from realizing our economic potential, I think that possibility that will become a heavier anchor is imminent. So let's take our community of 26,000 people.
And this is Statesville.
In Statesville, North Carolina. And we probably service 60,000 people, but we probably have 2,000 jobs right now that are going unfilled. We have more jobs than we have people to fill, available people to fill those positions. And so what's happening is our businesses aren't able to reach their economic potential. And we've just announced a new project where we may have 3,000 to 4,000 more jobs available. Mm-hmm. So the task for us is to work with the school system, to work with our community college system, but to help create pathways for folks to get involved in, to be more articulate in advanced manufacturing. But I think we have to be creative and imaginative in trying to attract people to live in our communities and live in our region. Mm-hmm. And we have the opportunity in North and South Carolina to live in the best place on the planet Earth.
Well, I'm not sure that we don't already, but you're right to develop that even further. I want to come back to something in just a second. You're talking about Larkin Business Park and Correct. The announcement in Statesville. It's a fairly meaningful piece. Before we do that, Joey, this idea of workforce development mm-hmm. and not finding enough talent, I don't want to overly simplify it, but is there one thing that lawmakers, the business community, communities in general could do that would go a long way in closing that gap?
Well, I think in South Carolina we have a good model for that in terms of the partnership between the technical college system and the government, the state government and commerce, and with the business community. So it all fits together in terms of communicating the needs of the business community back through the education system. Mm. And we see consistently in South Carolina that businesses, when they do announce that they're coming to our state, the main reason they say publicly is because of this access to workforce needs, that South Carolina responds to them. So I think that's a model. We have two programs, there are more, but two that come to mind, Ready SC, mm-hmm. Apprenticeship Carolina, that are nationally recognized as being very good at meeting these needs. And I think expanding that to other parts of the country and just expanding that more generally in our state is going to become more and more important as we move ahead.
Yeah, and a quick answer to this quick question, hopefully, is the technical college system in South Carolina, is that the linchpin in making this whole talent development work?
Yes, I think it can't just be the technical college system. I think the other institutions as well have to come on board, but we also have to recognize that the type of education, higher education matters, and developing these skills matter, but the type of higher education matters as well. Because we have to look at these four-year degrees and say, what are we preparing these students? What are the skills that they are achieving with their degree, and how are they going to enter the workforce?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got a couple minutes, about a minute left. Sure. David, I want to come back to this. Statesville, North Carolina, as you said, about 26,000 people live there, and there's been an announcement, it's been cooking for about 10 years, but Larkin Business Park is going to take up, basically on I-77, 4 exits.
4 miles.
4 miles.
Right.
Okay, still 4 miles frontage on I-77. This is a meaningful tract of land 3,000 plus employees in a town of 26,000.
Right.
This is a bit like, and the crew's heard me say this before, and I know they're all going to laugh at me, this is a bit like the antelope going through the python here, isn't it?
Well, you know, to some degree. But Chris, we've been working towards this for quite some time. We've tried to develop an infrastructure and a community that embraces this. We've got, you know, our city council has done a magnificent job in creating the infrastructural needs with a very expensive and extensive improvement to a wastewater treatment plant that can service the area. We now have home sites that are going to be available for this increased public. We created one of the most dynamic downtowns in North Carolina so that we could maintain our heritage, you know, of what we are. So we're excited about the Larkin Business Park with 5 million square feet of new industrial space. We expect some of that might be devoted to e-commerce business or distribution and that type of thing. We're excited about what it can bring, but we're also challenged by, as Joey had mentioned, we're challenged by trying to figure out how are we going to get people to work at this angle. Well,
and you know, you'll end up doing, you're going to have a lot of people watching. I wish David, come back when we have a little bit more time to take a deeper dive, because that's a meaningful announcement. You know, you've talked about workforce development, and we've heard it ad nauseum on this program, and we've heard it, so we're going to do a program coming up all about apprenticeships and all about the not the fast track or the fast lane, but really increasing what apprenticeships can do and what it will mean to getting workforce issues kind of sidelined so we can get more business going on. And then in 2 weeks, joining us will be the chairwoman of the South Carolina Ports Authority. Pamela Lacka will be back on this program to talk more about South Carolina ports and trade and commerce and all things in the Palmetto State. Not every company that can not only celebrate a successful 10-year run as a publicly traded company, but can do it during one of the most drastic recessions and financial upheavals in recent U.S. history. During that period, Triangle Capital Corporation has deployed just short of $2.5 billion into almost 200 companies. To what end, though? Joining us now is Triangle Capital Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Ashton Poole. Mr. Chairman, welcome to the program.
Chris, thank you. Glad to be here.
Ashton, you've heard some of the comments, but you know, I'd love to get your, you know, as you drive around the Carolinas, as you go to some of the urban areas like Raleigh, certainly, but Charlotte and Columbia, and Charleston and Asheville and so on and so forth, you see a lot of cranes, a lot of development. When you see that, do you think, yay, or do you think, you know, we're concerned about the financing here because we know how interest rates work and how money works and where we are in the business cycle? What goes through your head?
Sure, Chris, it's a great question. I think one of the misconceptions about Triangle, quite frankly, is that we are a North Carolina-focused or Southeast-focused company. The reality is we have about 30% of our investments in the Southeast, 30% in the Midwest, 20% on the West Coast, and 20% in the Northeast. So I'd say as a company and an investment committee, we don't start first with a state inspection. What we start with is a broader lens of looking at investment opportunities. And it starts with, is it an established company with positive cash flow? Does it have a seasoned management team with skin in the game? Does it have sustainable competitive advantages? Does it have customer and supplier diversification? And lastly, does it have a meaningful equity cushion to support the company during cycles? So we start with that lens first. And then once we peel back the onion to the extent that there is state concentration, we then start to dig into the state and the dynamics of the state in which the company is involved. Fortunately, North Carolina has done a terrific job of being diversified as a state, attracting different folks from parts of the country with a great quality of life, great education, and therefore what you see, whether it's in Raleigh, whether it's in Charlotte, whether it's in Asheville or other parts of the state, is a really diversified economy. So we have several investments in North Carolina or companies that have activities in North Carolina, and frankly, we wish we had more states like North Carolina's profile in our portfolio.
Good. Joey, question?
Yes, so when we look ahead towards 2018, 2019, from a national perspective, I think productivity growth is really where we need to focus in terms of long-run growth, in terms of how to boost that. How do we boost productivity growth? And so if we're looking at over the last several years in terms of what you're seeing regarding different industries, in terms of where demand is coming from, in terms of where research and development is more concentrated in. Can you comment on how you've seen changes in the last several years with respect to industries where you would anticipate more productivity growth going forward? Are we likely to see that based on the demand that you're seeing now?
Sure. I'd say that over the last couple of years we've seen a sea change by certain different industries. So, for example, I'll start with the industries where we've seen some weakness, which is no surprise to everybody. Retail, for example. Fast casual dining, for example. Defense has been an area where, with sequestration, there has been weakness in our defense exposure, but now we're seeing some positive tailwinds, and the question is, when will the backlog start to materialize? We've had investments actually in your state with a company that supports the automotive manufacturers, and we've seen some productivity growth there. I do think the trend that has been the case for the last 15 to 20 years of taking jobs offshore and taking manufacturing offshore, I do personally think we're going to start to see an influx back to the United States. We do have several portfolio investments where the key suppliers are in Asia, and we're starting to see wage pressures in Asia. We've started to see the sourcing move from what would be the traditional countries that you would think of to now smaller countries around the Asian region. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money for sourcing teams to go over every quarter and identify products, identify the suppliers, certify the suppliers, and make sure that they can continue to get their quality of goods in their shops and in the customer stores on time. So my personal opinion is we're going to see a resurgence back to the United States, and that will ultimately contribute to greater productivity industry-wide.
David?
The United States, well, let's say even the Southeast, has been on an economic roll over the last several years. I mean, that's coming off of the heels of a very rough period, but 2008 to 2012. So if we're on a roll of momentum, what are the domestic barriers or what are the domestic issues that might cause that momentum to stall that you can see, and how can we mitigate those barriers?
Right. Well, I think in the earlier part of the segment on education and making sure we have a workforce that's out there and getting trained in the marketplace is really important. I think for the longest time, because of the exporting of jobs out of this country, I think a lot of folks gave up on on searching for a job. And I think it's really important that companies work with the educational institutions to let them know these are the types of skills we need, these are the types of employees that we want, and get involved in an active and what I would say call systematic recruitment effort. And I think once we get those processes in place, it will result in a more systematic demand for labor going forward. So I think quality trained labor is really a key, and education is a critical part of that. And I think if we can continue to push with our universities and align the employers with recruiting, that's going to be a key part of it going forward.
Ashton, when you look at your portfolio, when you look at Triangle Capital's deployment of assets, and you specifically delineate out healthcare, and you hear the dialogue and the debate that goes on in DC now around healthcare, how does that drive further investment in the industry? Do you pause it? Are you more concerned about it? Are you more excited about the opportunities? I mean, what kind of goes through the office in dialogue? Right.
Chris, it's one of the hottest topics that we debate regularly because we see quite a few healthcare opportunities. We have a very active flow, as you can imagine, of deals that come in the pipe at Triangle. So our job is to filter those and prioritize those. And when you look at healthcare, I'd say that on one hand, with all that's going on in DC and the talk about reform, you might want to say, let's hit the pause button. On the other hand, when you step back and you look at some of the industries in which healthcare clearly is here to stay, that has a recurrent type of revenue stream, which again for a company like Triangle is really important, you say, well, there's opportunity. And then you have to go look at the underlying demographics, for example, of the population of the company in which they serve. You have to look at the states, you have to look at the age of the population, you have to look at the percentage that's commercial pay versus Medicaid versus Medicare versus just direct pay. So there's so many different influences that go into it that it's hard to answer that question without taking up a lot more of your time. But we just announced, for example, an investment in Schweiger Dermatology, one of the largest providers, if not the largest provider of dermatology services in the New York metro area. Great company with a really wonderful presence. We feel like dermatology is here to stay. We've also invested in Lakeview Health, which is an abuse center that works with folks who have abuse issues, substance abuse issues. We've got several other healthcare investments, but we try to pick our spots where we know that the service is important. It's part of a daily regimen of an ongoing care cycle of whether it's dental, whether it's dermatology, whether it's substance abuse. We try to pick our spots. We try to avoid those areas where there's heavy Medicaid exposure, for example, or where there's the potential for the government to come in and radically change the paying construct. Critical to due diligence on any of those opportunities is to look at the underlying codes that get billed for the services provided and understand what kind of reimbursement rates have been applied to those codes in the past and whether or not they've been viewed as excessive or under reimbursed, and how we would see those trends going forward. So we personally are bullish on healthcare. We wouldn't have made the investments that we have made without being bullish, but we also understand that there's a lot of inputs that you have to really consider. Again, whether it's who's paying, what the service is being provided, where it's being provided, what's the demographic of the population that's being served. All of those are so important to put in the mix of consideration.
Joey?
What other factors do you see, aside from interest rates for going up later this year, that are really going to affect your business and your outlook for the next, certainly for the rest of this year and into 2018, and specifically with respect to interest rates, how is that going to impact your forecast, and do changes in what Janet Yellen's expectations are over time, does that significantly impact anticipated demand?
Right. Let me start at the industry level, and then I'll get down to the triangle level. I think one of the exciting parts about the BDC world, as we call it, the business development company industry, is that we have grown substantially. We're now at about 100 billion of AUM, of assets under management. So of the publicly traded BDCs, that accounts for about 65 billion of that AUM. Of the privately traded BDCs, it's about 35 billion. So we're now at 100 billion of AUM. Triangle, as a company, is at $1.7 billion of AUM. When we went public 10 years ago, we were at 250 million of AUM. Our growth and the industry's growth has been really a function of the crisis that occurred in 07, 08, 09 timeframe, where post the crisis and the regulation that was put on banks tended to be reticent to hold assets on their balance sheet that were consistent with the type of loans that we make to the companies that we serve. So we and others and the whole BDC industry has been able to grow commensurately because of what has been a vacuum in capital that was needed and required by, in our case, 65,000 private companies that are in our target zone. So we as an industry are growing well. We're excited about the future. It is starting to mature. You're seeing large multinational finance companies come in the space. You're seeing pension funds, insurance companies. That's great for the universe of companies like Triangle. It also creates more competition. So the competitive dynamics are increasing. The beauty of it is the industry's continuing to grow and the maturation is continuing to evolve. As far as Triangle goes, we're very bullish about 17 and beyond. We have a substantial amount of liquidity. We have one of the most active platforms in the country, and so it's a function for us of making sure we keep the discipline around the opportunities that we see. It's not for lack of what I call at-bats that we have. It's making sure that when we see the at-bats, we're properly filtering for the high-quality opportunities that we want to pursue. We will continue to be diversified. We are in 93 investments, 31 different industries, and I gave you the geographic dispersion a little while ago, so we're spread all over the country, and not one of our investments accounts for more than 3.5% of our revenue. So our job is to make sure that we maintain that diversification across all sectors, across all geographies, and across all sizes. Based on the flow that we see, I'd say that the flow is there. The quality right now, I'd say, has been the question mark. So many companies are trying to refinance because the capital is available. that you just, you'll get the A companies that are refinancing, but you'll also get the C companies that are refinancing. And they're all able to refinance. The question is, at what price, and do you want to be associated with that refinancing when leverage rates are at an all-time high? And then you factor in the cycle risk, and you have to determine internally, where do we think we are in the cycle? We happen to think we're in probably the 7th inning of it, so we as a company are pivoting. We're starting to move up balance sheet to more first lien positions. We're also moving to larger companies that can withstand cycles to a greater degree, and we've pivoted the portfolio meaningfully in the last 12 to 18 months to position ourselves in the event that we start to see a cycle.
We are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask him a quick follow-up. You've done this before, haven't you? You've talked about this before. I can tell that.
Not my first rodeo.
Yeah, not your first rodeo. In about 30 seconds, though, Ashton, seriously, are you at all concerned about the cost of energy? Is that this bugaboo that's waiting to rear its head?
I'm not personally concerned about the cost of energy. I'm concerned about, ultimately, for our country, our diversification of fuel source. I think that historically we've been blessed with having a good balance of coal, natural gas, and nuclear. We're getting long in the tooth on the nuclear side because the plants are so old and they need either their licenses renewed, which requires a lot of capital, or they need to be retired.
Yeah.
No one wants to drill for coal, and therefore we're becoming more natural gas centric. And the question is whether or not renewables can take the load off.
Last word. Come back. Thank you. Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.